All right, I'm here with Lindsay Tjepkema, who is the co-founder and CEO at Casted, which is a B2B podcast and video marketing platform. There are around 30 people, started this company in 2019. And we're going to dive into all things podcast, AI content, and also why she started this company today. So Lindsay, thank you for joining.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So before you started this company, you were the VP of brand and content at Emersis.
At Emersis. Mm-hmm.
So I'm assuming this company came out of something you realized when you were in that role. So can you maybe take me back to that and why you started this company and what the insight was that you had?
Yeah, you're exactly right. So I have spent, 20 years now as a B2B marketer. And most recently at Emersis, I was leading this global brand and content team. And it was 2016 when I got started. And as I stepped into the role, I was like, we're going to do this different. We're not going to use the old playbook where everything is based off of writing. Obviously, we did a ton of written content, but I was like, I want to base it off of conversations. I want to record conversations. I want to experiment with some B2B podcasting, which was really new at the time. I want to do lots of video content. And then from there, let that fuel some of the written stuff. We'll pull written content and articles and white papers out of the recordings that we do. Still very much I'm very, very enthusiastic about that strategy. But the problem then is that there was no way to do it. There was no way to really easily not only capture that content, but wring it out and create clips and transcriptions and key takeaways that could be used to fuel other content. And even worse, there was no great way to measure it or understand who was engaging, how they were engaging, and what the heck all that content was doing. So that was the challenge that I had and the problem that we set out to solve.
That's awesome. 2016. I mean, that's what was the landscape then in B2B podcasting then?
Almost non-existent. I mean, now, since we've worked with a lot of customers that started podcasts, HubSpot kind of got started in, I think, 2014. Salesforce got started 2013, 2014. So there were some that were experimenting with podcasts, and this was back when it was pod, as in you listened to it on an iPod, or it was you downloaded the podcast.
Wait, is that how the name? Why
that's
it's called?
How the name?
What?
Yeah.
I never. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, back in. Some of the earliest podcasts were, I think, early 2007, 2010. Obviously not in B2B, but I had been really influenced personally by some of the things that Drift was doing. They had this Coffee with a CMO podcast. There were some other really cool marketing podcasts that really inspired me. And I said, you know what, we can do this. And this space is still new enough that we can own a piece of it in a big way. So it was new. Thankfully, because I had ownership of our content strategy for this global company, I was able to just say, hey, this is what we're doing. This is going to be foundational to our integrated marketing strategy. And I got a lot of support. In fact, our CEO was a big fan of what we were doing. But it was a big bummer that we couldn't prove its value. So
what was your framework back then in 2016 to think about why this works or is important? Because we're in 2024 and I would say most B2B companies still don't have a podcast and still are not convinced that this is a good thing to do. And you realized that 8 years before that. So what was the framework in your mind, how you thought about why this makes sense?
Something that I've been saying for a very long time, progressively more and more over the last probably 10 years is, hey, the most human brand wins. And when you can capture the real, original, authentic thoughts, experiences, and expertise of real people, your partners, your customers, your leaders, your people who work on your teams, people who are designing your product, when you can actually capture the words of what they're saying and how they think and how they feel and their challenges and how you're overcoming problems, that really should fuel everything. That helps to build connections with your audience in a real and meaningful way. And when you can capture that and then use it not just as that recording, but to fuel everything you're doing, your entire strategy, your entire integrated marketing strategy, and therefore your sales and marketing strategy is stronger because it's based on real thoughts, feelings, and emotions, not just what the business wants to say or what the algorithms are saying you should say to reach out to your audience. And to me, I mean, that's just been foundational to how I've approached marketing forever. And so I
Right.
think now, especially as AI is becoming more and more prevalent and powerful, as we're all under pressure to do more with less, it's an opportunity to zig when so many others are zagging and trying to do things the cheap, fast, and easy way. When you can just take a pause and say, "Yeah, but how do we create human connections here?" And so that's always been foundational. That's what I attempted to do, way back in 2016, and kind of ever since. I've said, like, how do we do this? How do we do this in a way that's more effective, more efficient, and just overall better?
Right. The landscape of podcasting has changed a lot in that time. What would you say does it take in 2024 to win with a podcast?
One, it's doing it, because as you mentioned, there are still a lot of brands in general, but we focus on B2B, and you're absolutely right. There's still a lot. I would say the majority of B2B brands don't have a show.
By the way, do you have a stat? Like, is it like 2% of
Yeah.
companies have a podcast? 10, 1?
Gosh, there's, a couple thousand, a few thousand, I'm sure. And there's, I would say, by the end of this year, we still won't be at half of B2B brands.
That would be a lot, I feel like.
Yeah, well, we talk to people obviously all the time.
Yeah.
And the number of brands that have tried, kicked it around, released a couple shows. We all know about Pod Fade, where you start a show, you release a couple episodes, or that are doing a video series, which I guess, really is kind of like a podcast. That it's really high. It's we rarely, we started the company 2019, here we are 5 years later. 2019, yeah, it was a different story. People were like, podcast? Why would I do a podcast? But now 5 years later, I would say probably about half to the majority of companies that we talk to. Now we're biased because if somebody's talking to us, they're at least on their radar. Have had one, are thinking about having one, or have one now. And so, you look at our kind of biased sample set and you mix that in with the rest, and it's a good chunk, but it's still in the minority. And so there's a long way to go, which means that even though as consumers of content, there's tons and tons of podcasts. Everybody has podcasts. Everybody's kids have podcasts. Everybody's parents have podcasts. But when it comes to B2B, it is not saturated. There's still tons of opportunity. And what you need to do to stand out is don't do what everybody else is doing. Don't do one just to have one. Don't, ask the same questions as everybody else. Don't necessarily do the same format as everybody else. Understand who it's for, why you're doing it, and how to serve them well. It's content marketing 101. It's marketing 101.
So what are maybe some examples of favorite shows that you feel are innovating or doing it a little differently or standing out?
Oh man, there's so many good ones. I think one company that I think is doing some really cool stuff, and I'll give a couple of examples. So Salesforce is one of our customers, and they have a show about AI that I think is really, really interesting, and what they're doing with it and what they're thinking about doing with it as far as how else can they use those episodes and how else can they get creative with it. I think is really cool. Obviously, the topic is really timely. And then somebody who speaks to how to do this sort of content well is Jay Akonzo. He's a good friend of mine. He's a wonderful person, and he really gets into like, what is your premise? What are you doing differently? How are you solving problems? And one of the things he says all the time is you don't have to be the best, but you should always seek to be their favorite, right? So it's understanding who your audience is and how to serve them well. So I think, and there's another one too. So one of our partners, Caspian Studios, they're a podcast production agency, and they really take a cool, different approach to B2B podcasting, and that they do a lot of really, really interesting storytelling. So for Jim Pass, they did a show called Murder in HR, and it's a murder mystery, true crime type podcast, but it's B2B. You should definitely check it out. It just like rightfully so got a ton of attention when it launched a few months ago. So Murder in HR, and I think they're working on kind of a series of other similar type shows too.
Yeah, I think if I think about the podcasts that I listen to, I would say the common denominator is that the hosts are just like the top 0.001% of their field. Whether Tim Ferriss, or Chris Walker in B2B marketing, or the All In podcast. It's just like people who have been there, done that, and who have accomplished real things, and now they share out of their toolbox. So I think that's really hard to obviously emulate, because only very few people are by definition in the 0.001% of people in their field. From my perspective is, I started a podcast 4 months ago, and my perspective was, look, if this is not going to become like, the big podcast in the B2B SaaS marketing space, I'm actually fine, because I can use this as a relationship building tool.
Yeah.
Because I can invite lots of people that I would love to start building a relationship with, either because they might be a potential customer, a potential partner, a potential, something.
Yeah.
And I can invite top people in their field on, because, if I want to attract B2B SaaS founders, I'm not a B2B SaaS founder. I can't tell them how to build it and do it, but I can invite other B2B SaaS founders who can then talk from their perspective, and that's going to be useful to our audience. So I think there's just so many benefits to it. And what I noticed too is the halo effect is real. Like I did a podcast with Chris Walker, and just the fact that people saw that he was on my show creates some sort of okay, so if he's going on Finn's show, then he must be doing something right.
Yeah.
Even though Chris Walker is going on 5 podcasts every week, so I think it's still super underrated as a tool, and then you get content out of it. Okay. So, how did you get first customers? Now let's move a little bit away from podcasting and more to growing a B2B SaaS. Take me back to 2019 when you started the company. You had that idea. How did you go about it? Did you already have a co-founder in mind? Did you have to find someone? Did you raise capital? Tell me that story.
Yeah. So we started as part of you might call it an incubator. It was a studio. So it was a venture studio. So that gave us the ability to really focus on value prop, MVP, and be a part of the studio that could give us some resources to they worked on kind of finance and HR and spinning up the company so we could spin up the product and get our first customers. But what we did, which I have recommended to anytime I get asked this question, how'd you get your first customers? What'd you spend your first days doing? I think it's the only, I did have a couple of co-founders, and the only thing we knew at the time was to go talk to people. Right. So before we started building anything or mapping out anything or saying, hey, this is what the product is, this is how it's going to function, I spent the first 5 or 6 weeks literally just talking to every single marketer I knew, every marketer they knew. Do you have a podcast? Yes, no, why not? Would you, why wouldn't you? What would you pay? What would you hope to get out of it? And just went on a listening tour. And then that also gave me the ability to say, hey, yeah, I'm doing this thing. I'm really excited about it. Here's what we think it's going to be. And then, so what that did is it gave us tons and tons and tons of data, and gave us the ability to say, okay, these are the common threads of what we're seeing that people want most, MVP, right? And then gave us some ideas for roadmap, some of the next product features that people would be interested in. And it also helped populate our CRM in the earliest days with people who were like, if you do that, I want to know about it, or I want to beta test it, or I want to be on your list. And so as a result, we had our first paying customer within 60 days. And that was before we had a product for them to log into, which was within our first 100 days. And it was all because we listened first and built second.
So you sold a customer 40 days before you actually had a product?
And they knew it. They knew it. And I mean, because your first customers are investors, right? Your earliest customers are going to be the people who are super duper, early adopters. They're not going to be the laggards. They're not the ones who are like, does it work? And is it super duper fail safe? They're the ones that are like, yes, sign me up, give me a deep discount. Let me influence roadmap. Let me poke poke at it and prod at it. And get a lot of influence over what you build. And they know it. They're ones who are used to being involved in that way, want to give you lots of feedback. They become part of your customer advisory board later. They have a high probability of renewing for the first 1 or 2 years. So yeah, I think being really aware as a founder that those first few customers, you're pitching to them basically like investors. And then after you kind of poke at things and iron out some of the kinks, you can actually sell to like a real customer process.
Yeah. How did you think about pricing? Because a lot of founders struggle with what price should I give this?
Yeah, those early days, and then ever since, from talking to other founders as well, I think it's much more art than it is science. It's testing. It's saying, hey, we think it's worth this. What do you think? And you either get laughed at and you need to be comfortable with it, or you get, oh my gosh, yeah, sign me up now, and you know that maybe that's a little too low.
Right.
And then so the first cohort is lumpy. You have some people that are up here, and you have some people that are way down here. But it's just testing, trying and asking and pushing. And every time you get a yes, you just kind of ratchet it up a little bit, and you get a no, you don't ratchet it back too much, but you keep trying. And it's art and science for sure.
So you have a bunch of big customers. You have Salesforce, you have IBM, I think I saw.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
How did you already plan to go enterprise in the beginning? Was that something that kind of happened? How did you think about what segment to go after?
Yeah, that was something that we, that was important to me from the earliest days. That's where my background was mid-market and enterprise, my co-founders too. And there was, especially now, but even back in 2019, there's no shortage of tools and point solutions for podcasting, right? Little things that you could buy, little widgets and gizmos to make a show cheap, fast, and easy, right? But no one was serving B2B specifically, and no one was serving, upper mid-market and enterprise. And those are different. Those content leaders and marketing managers and even CMOs and VPs are coming at podcasting, but content from a completely different angle than, if you and I wanted to start a podcast about our favorite hobby. Like they're completely different reasons, completely different things that you're measuring. And we knew, and I knew what it was like to lead a content team that was dispersed around the globe. People in Hong Kong have no idea that this podcast that's being recorded in San Francisco even exists. People in France need it transcribed so that they can create blog posts from it. Like we saw an opportunity to go to serve a different audience with the workflows and the business needs and the business models and the whole reason they're doing content being completely different than that of those who are really being overserved in kind of like the hobbyist space.
Right. So, okay. And then, were those early customers who really were your investors, mid-market companies, and then you went upstream from there, or? Yep.
They were mid-market B2B SaaS, I think is where our earliest kind of concentration was. We still have quite a concentration in SaaS, although definitely have some other industries and verticals too. But then pretty early on, we got Salesforce, I think within the first year and a half. IBM wasn't that much later. And so I think knowing who we were serving from early on really helped us.
Did they knock on your door, or did you say, we strategically want to get Salesforce because the big animal and if we can somehow win them, that's going to add a lot of credibility?
Yeah. So we went after them and, built the relationships and showed the value and said, hey, this is what we have now. We're still nimble and small enough to be able to serve you well. But here's the credibility. Here's our SOC 2 compliance and our all of these things that we've done well already. Help us mold the future of what this could be.
So for companies who do want to go up market, what would you tell them? What do they need to be, let's say, enterprise ready?
I think having experience. It seems really simple, but having experience in your company, like understanding how enterprise works, it's knowing your audience. It seems so simple, but understanding that enterprise is different. It's not just a bigger version of SMB or mid-market, not at all. It's a completely different beast. Their why is different. How they work is different. How they purchase is different. What they need to prove as far as value, how you need to serve them. And so I think it's really, really important if you want to go up market to have internal expertise not only selling into it and serving it, but also having worked in it. I think it's just super important. You know the nuances, you know the speed, and therefore you know what to expect, and you can anticipate potential challenges and opportunities. I think it's just, you've got to have some experience somewhere on your bench.
Does that need to be a founder, or can you hire a VP sales who has enterprise experience?
I think if you get the right person, even if it's not VP of sales, I think if you just get the right person, whether it's a founder, to fill that gap, whether it's in sales, product that's developing the product the right way, go to market, just having them there with a very strong background in and around enterprise, because enterprise sales means so much now, that I think it's watered down. So it has to be more than like, hey, I've done enterprise sales for the last 10 years.
Right.
That's not enough.
I'm just curious where your head is at in terms of hybrid motion, going down market, serving SMB. Like, are you at all thinking about introducing a PLG motion, or you're like, hell no?
We've toyed with the idea. It's so different. We have other priorities for our mid-market and enterprise customers. And we have offered little things, like we have a Casted for Startups program. If you're familiar at all with what Drift does and HubSpot, where they have a deep discount for qualifying startups. So not a small business, but a startup that is going to grow. And it's like a deep discount, and then it's tiered. So the next year it's not quite as a deep discount. And the third year it's a little bit of a discount. And then by the fourth year, you're on pricing with everybody else because they expect that you grow. We did something like that. We've gotten a little bit of interest from it. We've toyed with a couple little PLG things, but our bread and butter is mid-market and enterprise. And that's who we're designed to serve really well, as others don't. And so I think, yes, my opinion on hybrid, I think you have to be really, really careful. We know as founders and that it's easy to get distracted. And your greatest superpower is when you have the ability to focus. And so sometimes that even means saying no to opportunities to broaden your TAM a little too early. So it works for some, but I think trying to do sales-led growth combined with PLG can be a recipe for disaster if it makes you lose focus. Right.
How do you think about founder-led marketing? Now, this is, the name of the show, and it's our thesis that after founder-led sales, they should move to founder-led marketing. Lots of examples out there. You host your own podcast. I'm curious how you think about whether you even agree with the term founder-led marketing, and how you think about that framework of doing that, leveraging the founder or an executive.
First of all, I love it. I love that you're doing the show. And to add to that, I get asked all the time, when should I start thinking about marketing? Like, as a startup founder, when should I start thinking about marketing? And so for all of this, I think that everybody should be doing founder-led marketing. Every company that has founders should be doing founder-led marketing, and you should start immediately. There's no milestone that you should reach. There's no, okay, we did this, now we can start founder-led marketing. I honestly think, you go back to what I told you about how I spent the first 5 or 6 weeks. I didn't think about it this way. I just did it. But those early days, those first few weeks where I was talking to people, was every bit, as much as it was listening and shaping roadmap, it was marketing, right? People were like, what are you doing now, Lindsay? And oh my gosh, how can I help? And this is really cool. And how you should say it. And oh my gosh, that really resonates with me. Like, that was shaping messaging. That was shaping value proposition. That was getting our name out there. That was people starting to identify, my name with something cool that was coming. And that's so important. It's relationship building. A magical thing you have as a founder is that power that people identify you with your company. And if you build relationships and you build trust and you get people excited and you share your passion, the momentum and the energy will follow. It just will, both from your team, in the product, among customers, in the marketplace, from investors. So yeah, I absolutely agree with founder-led marketing. I love the term. And I think that every founder should be doing it. And sometimes there's like a duo where somebody's a little bit more behind the scenes, but any founder combo, any founder team, there needs to be at least one person that is going out there and, as part of their job, making sure that they are using their unique position as a founder to build and strengthen the brand.
Right. Yeah, I guess when I see transition from founder-led sales to founder-led marketing is when you go from a one-to-one to a one-to-many approach.
Mm-hmm.
Right. When you talk to people in your network, you could still call that sales. But once you produce a podcast, you put out content on LinkedIn, you produce your own show, you're now leveraged because you can record a podcast once and thousands of people can all listen to that. You mentioned measuring a podcast. How should companies measure their podcast?
Yeah, so they should all get casted. No, but I mean, whether it's with casted or not, I think you need to, going back to what we said earlier, understand who it's for and why you're doing it, right? So if your goal is to build a huge audience and sell ads, right? That's a completely different path and therefore different measurables than, I don't care if 10 people listen, if they are the right 10 people and they're super engaged and they become customers, or if they're already customers, they become lifetime customers and, spend more and more with us every year. Those are two very different paths. It could be, elevating our founder's brand. It could be, generating immediate sales, like building relationships with people that come on. You have to first understand, just like with any effort, like, who is this for? Why are we doing it? What are we hoping to get out of it? And that also forces some decisions where, okay, do we want this to be a huge, new and noteworthy on Apple Podcasts? Mm-hmm. Or do we want it to deeply resonate with the right audience of this very, very niche group? You can't have both, So it forces some of those important questions. So you're not trying to do all of the things and measure all of the things. And then you can get into, what do we measure? That said, regardless of what you end up with that exercise, it's important to not only look at how the show is performing and saying, like, number of views, downloads, impressions, watches, but also do whatever you can do to get to the who is actually engaging. Mm-hmm. Casted does that. There are some others that are starting to pop up that do that as well. There's a certain amount that you can get to that information by posting it on your own website and owned media and seeing who comes through your website. There's different ways you can do it. You can. You were talking about Chris Walker. He talks about self-reported attribution all the time, which is basically asking, how'd you find out about us, and see who says through your podcast. So just really being as conscious as possible with the resources you have to understand as much as possible what brands and what people are engaging with your content.
Do you have any thoughts on qualitative versus quantitative data? I feel like there's just this over-reliance on quantitative. Yeah. We had a conversation yesterday with a customer, and the VP marketing said, we started producing content for their CEO on LinkedIn recently. She's like, yeah, we can't really measure it, but our SDRs are saying that it's really helping them, and people are coming on calls and they said, yeah, we saw John's content on LinkedIn, who's the CEO. I'm like, that's data. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's measuring. It's just not a number in a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
So do you have any thoughts on that, of understanding?
I have so many thoughts on that, Finn. I have so many. Listen, not everything that matters can be measured, and not everything that can be measured matters. I heard that a very long time ago. I've lived with it ever since, because it's so true. Just because you can measure it doesn't mean that it's indicative of some greater success. And just like you said, even if it can't be measured, especially when it comes to content, that doesn't mean that it's not working, right? So both are really important. We live in a world that is making it by the minute more and more possible to get quantitative data. So that's great. But to your point, an over-reliance on it just makes for sterile, robotic, formulaic content. And we're seeing that, in this time where there's a push to do more with less, resources are low. It's like, let's only do the things that are working. And it's like, well, that's saying let's only do the things that the data is saying is working. What about, the humans, and what about people that are listening to your podcast quietly for a year before they move into a new job and can finally make the purchase of whatever it is you sell. That matters. Like those are relationships. And it's just like those coffee meetings that you have with somebody, or the once a month Zoom calls that we have with somebody, that's building a relationship that later on could turn into partnerships or working together or buying from each other. So yeah, I mean, you asked how do I feel about it? I couldn't agree more. I think that data is great, but talking to people, asking how what you're doing is resonating, listening to your SDRs, listening to your CX team and saying, hey, like, what are people saying about what we're putting out there? What's clear, what's not, what's working, what's helpful to you in your role, what's helpful to them. And actually paying attention to it and using that just as much as you use the quantitative data. It's really important.
Do you have any thoughts on operationalizing the qualitative? Because it's easy for us. We're 9 people. I do all of our sales and marketing. Like it's easy. I put out a LinkedIn post. I talk to people on a sales call.
Sales enabled all the time.
Exactly. But if you have like a 20 people SDR team and you have layers of management, like you still need to show leadership something.
Yep.
Do you have any thoughts on operationalizing this qualitative stuff?
Yeah. So at Casted, we've worked with such teams. I mean, IBM and Salesforce. Back at Amarsis and prior, I was the leader of those teams. And when you're in that role, yes, it is important to operationalize it, but it starts with getting buy-in, right? In those cases, arguably your most important audience is your internal audience, right? So before you can say, how are we going to measure how are we going to get our SDRs to ask every single person they talk to if they've listened to our podcast? Like before you go do something like that, you need to make sure that the SDRs understand the value of the podcast, that they're listening, that they're incentivized to understand what's going on, that they're interested, that they understand that you're not doing a podcast because you think it's fun or cool, but because or any other initiative for that matter, but truly to make their lives easier. Like you are there to serve them and making that when they pick up a phone, and obviously we're just using SDRs as an example, but when they pick up a phone or send an email, that the person on the other end is that much more likely to know who your company is because you've been doing this content, and to take the call or respond to the email because, what Finn had to say was just super, super interesting. And oh my gosh, I've listened to that podcast before, or because the clip that they sent was really engaging and really relevant. So that's hard because that disconnect of like marketing doesn't understand, my job is hard, I don't have time to listen to the podcast is real. I've been there. But if you can really build, again, relationships with the people that you're trying to serve, your SDRs, your sales team, leadership, your CX team, people who can really, you have to believe it, that can really benefit from your content and really spend the time saying, I created this for you, here's how, here's why. Only then will you get buy-in, at which point you can start to measure like the qualitative outcomes. And it takes time. It does. I wish that there was an easier magic wand to make it happen faster, but it comes from relationships and it comes from understanding the roles that they play, the challenges that they have, and truly saying like, I really am trying to help you with what I'm doing.
Right. I think that's generally true what you said, which is that if sales likes what you're doing as a marketer, that's a really strong indicator that it's actually working.
Yeah.
Because they have commission, they're incentivized to get more inbound leads who have affinity. And if you as a marketer need to twist sales arm into sending out that ebook, maybe it's because the ebook is shit.
Or you've done a bad job. I mean, just to be honest, a bad job of explaining why it's not, why it is actually helpful.
Yeah.
And, I've sat on both sides. I have literally sat on one side of a table while a salesperson like yelled at me and told me I would never, ever understand their job. And like, they started crying. And this was a very long time ago, very, very long time. And I've also been like, work best friends with the head of sales of like, what your team is doing is amazing. You make our job so much easier. When someone comes inbound, they're that much more likely to convert than my team having to go out and, go hunt for leads. Like it's two completely different worlds, and it's worth the time. It's worth the energy to build that relationship and serve that internal audience first, if you can get there.
Any thoughts on having the marketing and sales departments sit under one leader
one go to market leader,
Yeah,
or
CRO
chief
was like,
revenue officer.
yeah.
Gosh, I used to be so strongly against it. Sitting in the marketing seat, I felt like, because what quite often happens is in those situations that revenue leader tends to be more sales oriented, and marketing becomes just an assistant to sales.
Mm-hmm.
But if you can avoid that and you get someone who truly does understand go to market and revenue, and that they are equally as important and need to work together, and isn't just a sales rep that is now, CRO, then I think it can be beautiful. It can be magical. I have, since the days that I was, so strongly against it, I've seen it work really well. Some of our customers do it really well, where they have a go-to-market leader. Latney Conant at Sixth Sense was an iconic CMO who is now a CRO. I don't work for her, but I know her, and I know that, Sixth Sense is doing great things, and she's doing great things. And I think coming from, a very sales-oriented marketing leader, it can be a beautiful thing where that relationship is really fostered and encouraged.
Right. I heard this prospect said that the other day, that we were talking about thought leadership and that they need to build thought leadership, and I asked why. And they said that they feel like product differentiation is becoming harder and harder. Like a lot of these tools and platforms kind of merge and all become the same thing with different names on them. And that go to market matters way more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you agree?
I think that's true. I think the market's also very noisy. There's never been more content in the world, not even just in B2B, but just literally everywhere. And so, products are commoditized. AI is everywhere. Everything has AI now. That's commoditized. And look how fast that happened, right? Your differentiator is human, right? It's how you human. It's how you build relationships. It's how you show up. It's how you understand your audience. It's how you say, look, Finn, I understand what you're challenged with. I understand your challenges and your motivations, and therefore that's why we created this. It all fits together. As a founder, when you're doing founder-led marketing and founder-led sales, hopefully you have that ability to empathize, and really resonate with your audience, because you've been there and you truly deeply understand. I mean, that can't be replicated, right? And when you lean into that from a brand standpoint and a product standpoint, that's truly what's going to differentiate you. So call it go to market, call it founder-led marketing, call it positioning. It's all part of that. Like, how do you truly show up as a human, remember your why, remember who it's for and why you're doing it, and lean into that. And then even if your product literally is exactly like the one next door, if your why is different and your how is different, how you serve your customers is different and explained as such, you're going to be the one that succeeds. So
how is Casted using AI in your own product?
We are actually this afternoon, as on the day we record this, we're actually doing a webinar this afternoon with Marketing AI Institute.
Oh, I saw that.
To talk about some pretty cool features that we're rolling out. So from a high level, what's been really important to me as a marketer founder is to say, hey, we're incorporating AI not to do things for you, not to create more content for the sake of more content, not to replace your creative self, but to help you be more creative and focus more on human connections, because we're going to take some of this stuff that you're doing and make it easier for you to do the work. So that looks like, suggesting clips for you, and so that you don't have to pull them on your own. It looks like semantic search, so that you can go through your entire library of content that lives in Casted, all of your audio, all of your video content, and say, hey, I'm looking for this, and get recommendations around what you might mean by that and what might be related to that content. And it looks like eventually, how can you use that entire library of content to not just promote the new stuff, but to continually go back to what you already have and repurpose it and reuse it and remix it and resurface it in ways that are really meaningful to your audience, and help make those suggestions to you as a marketer, so that you continue to go back to what you have, shop your closet, if you will, just to really be rich, relevant, and meaningful to your audience. And then also looking at all the data, and we're talking about data in a different way. So it's not just like, hey, here's how this performed. It's starting to say, how can we use the data that you have and the content that you have to make recommendations about how you can be more effective, more relevant in the future, and just again helping marketers be more creative, and in doing so be more effective is our overall goal.
What do you feel like is the role of AI, the role that AI is going to play in content creation? And I would like especially to explore it from the framework of job roles. You know, when you think about the marketing team, you have the copywriters and the video editors and the content strategist and the SEO specialist and the creative director. What role do you feel like is AI best suited to completely take over, to support, and not going to touch it because that's going to stay being a human?
Yeah. Well, I think, a couple of things. One, we're already seeing so quickly that what AI can do and will be able to do is astounding, right? So it can create net new content. It can, it could synthesize this entire conversation, right? With our faces and our voices and everything. Should it? I don't think so. I don't want to be a part of that. I don't want to make that. I don't want to like tell AI to make this conversation, and I don't want to listen to it as a consumer. So starting, I think, from the end of what you asked for is what should it not replace? And it's conversations, right? So the marketers and the marketing teams and the brands that remember that these conversations, capturing conversations, having conversations, capturing conversations, even if it's one person talking, true thought leadership, two people having a conversation, a panel discussion, people using their brains to communicate, capturing that as audio and video content should not change, right? That's original content. AI, at least right now, can only use that which only exists to reformulate it to create something else, right? Your brain is constantly like drawing on past experiences to come up with new ideas and to share them, right? That's what can and should and will, I believe, remain, right? So if you're in and around that, that's a good place to be. What I think we will see is everything happening from there. So what then happens to those conversations? How are those audio and video conversations used? There's going to be a mix of a human and being enabled by AI and technology to say, okay, we have all of this content. How can I use net new? How can I use things that we already have? How can I use what I know about my audience, what the data is telling me, based on like experiences, to use this content in ways that will really resonate with them and be really effective and help us serve them well while meeting our business goals, right? It's that using data, being creative, using AI, using tech, creating human connections. And then I think where we'll see the greatest change with AI, I don't know if it's replacing, but like really changing roles, is things that are really, and we're already seeing it, really manual now, of like, I'm going to enter in this metadata. I'm going to post this show. I'm going to take this clip and post it on social media. And I'm going to take this other clip and I'm going to make a video embed. All of that happens once a conversation is had, once a video is captured, and it fits into a strategy, and that there's been some conversations about how do we use it to really resonate with our audience. A lot can be done today and will be done in the future to really automate and optimize how that content is then disseminated. So I think how to really stay relevant and compete is again, going back to the human part, is how do I say, who are the people in this space who are going to resonate with my audience? Who am I trying to serve? What am I trying to do? Prioritizing that, and then understanding the resources you need, both of humans and technology, to capture those conversations, to make them happen, and to get them out to the right people.
Love it. Yeah, I love it, because I feel like a lot of marketing is also zigging when everyone is zagging. And I don't know if that's the bubble of B2B SaaS that I'm in, but I feel like everyone's like using ChatGPT for their LinkedIn posts now.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's the like secret Luddite in me, but I have so little interest of using ChatGPT for my LinkedIn posts.
Yep. So there you go. Anybody who sees us on LinkedIn, it's actually us. Yeah. If I say, yes, good post, it's actually me thinking, yes, that was a good post.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And it's
I'm
not
right there with
hacks,
you.
right? Like people always want the hack, and it's not the, hey, nice LinkedIn post comment that is getting you the results. It's
Right.
the writing the comments that's the start of a relationship that you can
Yes.
then keep building, and they remember you and you remember them. And then when you actually have a conversation, because you actually read the post, you can
Yeah.
actually reference it instead of having some AI that like auto posted some comment under 50 people. It's not going to
Yeah.
work. So
And maybe you even know the person, right? So you and I know each other now. And so if I comment on your post, like I have some context about who you are
right,
and some background about where the post came from. And it's just, again, why? Why do you want to hack? Why for the sake of more? Then what? Right? Okay, so you
right.
grow your audience, then what? So now you have some AI thing automating all of your LinkedIn content, let's say, and all of your comments. Then what? Like
Yeah,
we have to start really asking ourselves why
right,
and what we're in this for.
right,
And I hope that some people start to say, I don't know.
right.
You're right. And just do the things that make the most sense and that build relationships.
Right. And I mean, if you use the same LLM as everyone else, then it's turns out you're not going to create original content because it's love it.
It is by definition not original content. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to ask this question. Maybe it's gonna break the scope of the remaining time that we have, but if you can maybe summarize it in a nutshell, if you were the head of marketing, head of content at fill in the blank B2B SaaS company, mid-market. I wanted to say Gong, but Gong is already a customer of yours. So, and you had to start a podcast from scratch. What would the step-by-step process roughly look like?
I'll do it fast. I'm very long-winded. I'll make it quick. One, again, ask yourself, who is it for? Why are you doing it? Because if you are, ABC Incorporated and you're trying to serve the world, it's going to be a bad show, right? So pick a niche audience, pick a segment, understand who really, really deeply, who you're trying to serve, and then why? What are you trying to get out of it? It's first step. Once you have that, identify people. They don't have to be big influencers, just who's going to resonate best with that audience that you identified, and book a few interviews. And as a host, which you talked about earlier, make sure that the host is not necessarily the most obvious person. Like it doesn't have to be your CMO or CEO, like who knows the space best and therefore will have the best conversations. That could be an intern. That could be a product leader. That could be a salesperson. Like, again, who's it for? Why are you doing it? Will help you get to who should be the host. What should you ask? What are you hoping to get out of the show? And then lastly, as you start recording, like remember, it doesn't have to be every week forever and ever. Record 10 episodes, produce 10 episodes, publish 10 episodes, see what happens, take a little break and adjust and go from there.
Do you make it video and publish to YouTube? Do you make it audio only? Do you make it a live event and try to bring an audience to it?
To get started, first of all, always do video. Like unless you have a really good reason not to, and some people do, do video, do both. Publish to YouTube, publish RSS feed, publish to your own website, and from day one, start ringing it out. Use clips, use a transcription. Don't just publish a show. Use that as a starting point for the hub of all of the spokes of everything else you can do. And then, just don't put the pressure on yourself to do a live event as you're launching a show. But once you get going, I think that's a really, really good way to like launch a new season every season, because then you have a live event, you're recording anyway, and it's just a really great way to just maximize your exposure.
And now let's say I have the 10 episodes. I'm going to schedule them out now, one a week for 10 weeks. What are the main things you would be thinking about of how to actually drive an audience to it and get people to listen to it?
Do a launch, right? So try to build up as much momentum, kind of tease it up as much as you can, get whatever your company looks like, get your team. We were talking about internal audience, help them understand why you're doing it, help them understand what's in it for them, and therefore get them posting about it and sharing it and reaching out to customers and prospects and saying, hey, this is the thing we're doing. And don't just launch it. Don't just make it a marketing thing. And then if you can I've seen a lot of success with dropping like 3 episodes all at once. And then from there, doing it weekly. and just continuing to remember it's not just about the show, it's about how all the other different ways that you can use that content in written content, on social media, in sales outreach.
And then let's say we're at the end of the 10 weeks, we've now published our season 1. What would the couple of things you would be looking out for to decide, do we do season 2 now? Do we keep going? Do we need to completely switch the model, have a different host?
Yeah. I would definitely plan on doing season 2 and maybe even season 3, because it takes that long to start to really get some traction. So I would actually say after like your first 10-ish episodes, don't let yourself stop, because you'll want to. You'll be like, well, that's done, and we only got 100 views, and that's not worth it. Do a couple of seasons, but give yourself a break. Look at who's paying attention. Look at who internally, how the internal buy-in was, how you can strengthen that. Look at who some of your biggest champions are internally and externally. See how you can leverage those, and see what you really loved about it. And if you change anything, don't change your audience, because you just worked on building that up, but give yourself the freedom to change topics, adjust topics as long as it's still serving that audience, change the show format if that needs some adjusting. But yes, try to see it through for, 2 or 3 seasons of those 8 to 12 episodes before you really start to say, hey, is this working or not?
Love it. Yeah. I think the only thing I would, if I have the audacity, to increase the chance that you get company buy-in to continue after the 10 episodes, even if you only got 100 views or whatever, because it takes time to build, by making the guest the key decision maker at one of your target accounts. It makes it much more easily justifiable, because then at least you can say, well, we have the foot in the door with 10 decision makers at 10 of our target accounts now at the minimum.
Yeah, that's a smart way to start, because again, and that's keeping both your external and internal audience in mind.
Right.
That's smart.
Yeah, love it. All right, Lindsay, we passed basically an hour here. Thank you so much for your time. I enjoyed the deep dive into B2B podcasting. Any last thoughts, any additions, anything you feel like we should have mentioned that we didn't mention?
Casted is at casted.us. You can find me we talked a lot about LinkedIn. I'm there a lot. And just remember the most human brand wins every time.
There we go. And we will put both your LinkedIn and the Casted website in the show notes. So if anyone is interested, they can find you there.
Sounds
awesome.
Great.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks.